So welcome to Sunday morning Vedanta series question answer. As usual, we begin with prayer for teacher and student. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cover with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So this is a question-answer time. Why we have this? When we have these sessions, I have no idea what your question is going to be. So let us see what divine inspiration brings to us. So I'll mute the microphone while you formulate some questions.
I do have a question, Swamiji.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know if there's an answer to this question. Did the spiritual leaders know they were spiritual leaders?
What do you think? You all understand the question. Do spiritual leaders know that they are spiritual leaders? What do you think?
I think when you are doing, because you are doing, you don't realize. I think it's when you look back or things happen that we have realizations. Like, let's say we are in a chaotic environment. In that moment, you're just trying to survive. You don't see what that is bringing you as growth. You see it after that has passed. You see how much you have grown. So my question is, did those spiritual leaders that were living such strong wisdom know what they were doing in that moment, or it's been after that legacy of wisdom and knowledge they have brought that actually they have been known as spiritual leaders? Because in that time, like let's say Swami Vivekananda, when he was doing those speeches that he was teaching and so on, he might have been seen as someone very wise that is bringing those new ideas and wants to bring everything together, and it was something very world-changing. But it might have not been seen as the big spiritual wisdom and strength, like the lion that he brought, like being the elephant. So this is my question. I don't know if it makes sense.
Okay, so there are many layers to this. One layer will be that there's a legacy historically after somebody has arrived on the scene. The way we view the true leadership, the leaders with the greatest impact, would be described by Swami Vivekananda as there are waves in an ocean. From time to time, a giant wave comes along and sweeps everything away. So we have these giants of these modern times. Certainly, Ramakrishna, Paramahansa, Vivekananda, all of these two are linked. Jesus, Swami Vivekananda once asked his master, we can only rely on the historicity of Buddha and the historicity of Muhammad. The rest we don't really know. Supposing Krishna never existed, supposing Rama never existed, then Ramakrishna's reply was, something existed to last 5,000 years, 7,000 years. So something exists. What do we call it? Well, there are various terms for it. Probably a popular term for it is spirit. And we can use this in the Yoga Vedanta terminology as Shakti, a great power. A power that arises like a wave and leaves its impact. Now, those people, those giant waves, do they know that they're giant waves? And the answer has to be yes and also no. So that's a very carefully crafted answer that covers all bases. So let's deal with the yes part. Some personality like this has some idea of their destiny. And that seems to be revealed as their own time goes on. And other people also have an inclination of it, not just these people. For example, in Kamalpur, where Ramakrishna grew up, there was a certain craftsman who saw at when Ramakrishna was a very, very early child. All children are early, I suppose. I know I was born at a very young age. So he understood, he saw immediately that this is a special thing. Now, we of course use this word incarnation with this caveat that when we use this language, we're not getting involved in theology, because that's a big danger about using this word. We can take it or we can leave it out. So there's a recognition from others. There's a recognition internally for these people that there is a certain destiny, a certain designated, designed role that a person has to play. Now, all of us have this to some extent, not necessarily in the role of leadership, but in other contexts, because we have to understand our uniqueness, that we all fit together in a social context, and where there's great harmony, which we call dharma. Everyone uses their own role, and that is what Bhagavad Gita says, please don't take on the role or the svatdharma of somebody else, because you are fitted for this. There's only something that you can do, only you can do alone. Nobody else has done it, nobody else can do it. But we all have the potential of creativity. Let's take, for example, Leonardo da Vinci. He was a polymath. That means he was uniquely placed to be the greatest artist of his time. He was a painter, he was a draftsman, he was an engineer, he was a scientist, he was a theorist, he was a sculptor, he was an architect, and he did all of these things perfectly. He invented machines ahead of his time, none of which probably worked, but never mind. What was the key to his ingenuity? People say there's a genius. Well, it was curiosity. And all of us have the capacity to be curious, to ask why this, why that? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? How does this work? Can we take something apart? Can we reconstruct it? And this aspect of curiosity becomes a revealer for us. And we use it not only in the context of our own role, but in a wider, more general context. There's every reason why we should take an interest in modern science. And we don't have to be parrots. We don't have to simply have an opinion because somebody else said it. Because the more we know, with all the methodology that we find in some areas of science today, we know that many prominent people are just theorizing because they don't know and they're trying to grasp something from a speculative angle. So we have to use our own creativity. We have to put our own individual mark. So all these leaders, there's one thing that they all have in common, that they have nothing in common, that they're all individualists using their own creativity with some understanding, some drive. I have a specific destiny, and the greatest leaders have the destiny that will change the whole world. Historically, militarily speaking, there are people who are fans of Napoleon and people who think Napoleon was a terrible person. So we take both sides and we see, in the context of military strategy, in the context of courage, in the context of leadership, he was outstanding. Why? Because he had faith in himself. And he had faith, therefore, in his abilities. When we extend that in the spiritual way, we understand that we have a divinely dispensed series of qualities and skills that we can apply. And our faith is not only in ourselves, but our faith is in the deeper level of what we call in religion God. So that there is a God, a faith in that put us in the right place, in the right time, in the right religion, in the right geographical location, in the right historical context. And so that is the driving force behind everything. When we attribute it to that, it increases our faith. So what should we in Vedanta have? We should have faith in ourselves, faith in the Guru, faith in the scriptures, and faith in God. All of these kinds of faith are necessary for our progression. So we find leaders in all these different contexts, be it in the military context, be it in the artistic context, be it in the creative context of Leonardo da Vinci, who had a curiosity about everything. We'll see that faith is required. The faith that if I examine something, it will reveal itself. The faith in the power, the skill that we have to take all our attention and move it in a certain direction, direct it in a certain way, it then becomes a revealing factor for us. When we do it internally through meditation, using the power of mystic instinct and inspiration, it becomes a revealing factor for us. Externally, we can do it. Internally, we can also do it. Now, what is the no part of this? The no part of this is that the secret of leadership, or the secret of making your mark, is this letting go aspect that accompanies faith. Faith is not faith unless the trust is sufficient for you not to be anxious about it, not to worry about it. And when we do that, in the spiritual context, we open up the ego, if you like. We make the ego a kind of avenue where divine grace can flow by itself. And so, what is leading the way? The Spirit is leading you on. It is the Spirit leading on. Tao. It is the Spirit leading the way. Letting the Spirit lead you. So others may see you as a leader, but the leader may say, no, I am being led. So this is the yes and no answer to the question. And then, of course, there are people, personalities, who simply live a life aligned to the truth. And so they don't know whether they lead us or not, but they leave a mark, and way after, they're recognized in their field. Humble people who make their small mark and live a life like that, a life of holiness, great sanctity, who don't register any idea of I'm a leader. That kind of egoistic stance is not present with them. And yet they leave their mark. Maybe posthumously, they leave their mark. We are in a time of Lent for Christians, which began on Ash Wednesday, sometime in February 27th, I think it was, something like that, and will end on 28th of March, as I understand it. And so a part of that will be the accompaniment, if you like, of Jesus's journey to the cross. How did this begin? It began because St. Francis, unwittingly leading the way, went into Jerusalem when he was allowed by the Saladin for the Muslims, and they were allowed to come in. And St. Francis, who was, as far as we know, the first recipient of stigmata, and he wanted to know everything about the historical Christ. So where did he go? The Via Dolorosa, where did he stop? What happened here? What happened there? And so that became a kind of institution which was adopted now by every Catholic church, called Stations of the Cross. And it is a highly meditative thing, because you want to know everything about your Ishtadevata's life. Same thing with every other historical Ishtadevata. So if you take, for example, Krishna as a historical Ishtadevata, then you'll want to know every aspect of his life. That means you'll want to go to Vrindavan. You'll want to see, where did he play? Where were the gopis? What was the loving interaction that was there? Can I catch the feeling of it? Can I replay it in my imagination? It's a form of meditation. One form of meditation is to replay the historical events in a particular outstanding holy personality's life. Walking with him, walking the mile with him. We did a meditation recently, which I think was recorded by a participant here, actually. And there we did that replay. How can I walk by a sea, for example? Let's say take Jesus, the Sea of Galilee. See, so do I see the markings of his sandals in the sand? What is it like to put my foot in that sacred hollow? And then how did we sit? How did we eat? What did we discuss? All of those things is a wonderful kind of meditation that we can use, a personal devotional meditation. We can do the same thing, for example, when we go to Kolkata, when we go to Dakshinaswar, where did the master, let's say Ramakrishna, walk? What did he say? How did he greet me? What would his eyes look like? What was beaming from his skin in the evening time? How did he respond when it became twilight? And when the bells of the temple rang and singing began and music started in the music hall, things like that, you see. How did he look across the Ganga River and so on? Taking a journey like that, deepening it so that there's an intimate sense of connection like that. So St. Francis, I don't think ever intended to found anything, coming back to him, but he was interested to know the lives of this person, this divine entity that he was worshipping, identifying with him so closely that it resulted in physical manifestation called stigmata. Now, he didn't know, I don't think, that he was doing anything radical or revolutionary. I think after the fact, and only now do you know that this tradition came from him. Same thing as the crib at Christmas time came from him. I don't think it was intentionally trying to found something. I don't think Buddha was founding Buddhism. We asked Buddha, oh, you're the founder of Buddhism. He wouldn't recognize anything you're just saying. I don't think any of these individuals were conscious that they were founding something. So leadership in that sense, I don't think they're aware of. Anyway, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, Swami, now I do have another question.
Okay.
What is the root of faith?
What is the root of faith?
Yes.
Now we're going to make this interactive. What do you think?
Okay. I think, because faith has to be born. I see a seed. You plant a seed and then it pops out like a flower. So there has to be this seed. So when I think of someone that has that faith in themselves to bring that to the world, and faith in God, and simply trust that flow, for me that has to be a seed, but I can't see that seed.
So before the root there's a seed. That makes some botanical sense. So what
Yeah.
is the seed should be the question.
Yeah.
So how does the seed get planted in us where faith can grow? Let us take the context of faith in oneself. The ultimate faith in oneself comes from an understanding of Atman. And where does that understanding come from? We all know it. If we didn't know it, we wouldn't use this word I. We all know that there is something called I. The only difficulty is we assume that the particular version of it, that is the version made from parts, that is us, because we are persuaded. There's a self-awareness that takes place. A child looks in a mirror, recognizes it, and is always treated as an individual, and we see other individuals. It's a learning experience to know that we are individuals. Then how do we change that? We use that basis, and then we learn, okay, this discerning question, who am I? And so the ancient rishis managed to do that. Now we can go through that process, no doubt, but the rishis have done it for us. And it's contained in all the texts. It's contained in the Upanishads. So we get our faith from experience, our own experience, and that of others that we can rely on. And so that's what we call the scriptures, and that's what we call the self-evident analysis of who am I. The turning point for me personally was that as a young child, I was persuaded that I am a body and with a soul. And then the turning point came from a logical understanding and realization. No, I'm a soul with a body. How is that reached? Well, the whole scriptural analysis is there to say that the body, what is its constituent parts? Anything that has constituent parts, is there any permanence of it? We're looking for something that is permanent. And when people discuss consciousness, they're not asking the question necessarily, who knows it? Whatever you say, whatever you do, who knows it? Who is the knower? And when you make that original analysis, you come to the conclusion, oh, there's a datum beyond which I cannot go further. That must be I. So I exist. I have always existed. I'm existence itself. That conclusion has to come. Now, there's an emotional disconnect from that. We have to catch up the feelings. When somebody says something against you, how do you feel? And why should you feel like that if you are not male, you're not female? So all these so-called difficult questions get answered by our Vedanta philosophy. At the moment, there's a big concern that I have no real understanding about, because I think it's a storm in a teacup. A transgender seems to be an issue. And it's not an issue everywhere in the world. It's only an issue in the Western part of the world. Probably out of boredom. We have nothing to discuss or think about. Let's pick on this subject, where we take, I don't know, 0.1% or something of the total population, and they are transgender and so on. Let's make an issue out of it and make it a question of choice. And all these layers of complications are put in. Then Vedanta says, forget about it. There's no gender. There's only the Atman. The Atman is neither male nor female. Is referred to as tat, neutral gender. So when we bring all these issues out, we find our final tool in the toolbox will be the deepest realizations of the Vedanta philosophy. So we make that our seed. The seed is from experience. The experience that is contained in other people's realizations, contained in scripture meaning the record of somebody who says, I have this direct experience. And secondly, how to do it. This is the manual. This is the operational manual. A, B, C to Z, this is how to do it. Now, if you're not prepared to do the A to Z of it, and the practice of it, then the faith is not there, will not be there. So the seed of it has to be there based on your own understanding of who are you, and based on others' understandings. Now, you may say, well, this answers the question about faith in yourself, because it doesn't end there. The fact that you have this Atman, the self within, also indicates that it is not isolated from the body and mind complex, that it manifests through that as skills and talents and abilities. And you tie the whole thing together and say, there's something unique in me that I can do, and I can manifest this divinity. Each soul is potentially divine, you know that from Swami Vivekananda. The goal, what is the goal? The goal is to manifest this. You might say, in addition, from within. And then not only that, but what will be the consequence of it? You'll be controlling nature, internal and external. The more you do that, the more faith you have in nature itself, in the internal self, and in all the magnificent divine arrangement, divine milieu, Ted Chardin puts it, the divine milieu that comprises the whole existence. So that is faith in oneself, as not only in oneself internally, but in also the manifested version of it. Then what about the manifested version that arranges that, called our environment? You can see that everything is arranged nicely. You can see that we all have faith that the sun will rise tomorrow. We all have faith that we will open our eyes tomorrow, even though that may be a false faith, because it may or may not happen. We assume it happens because our experience says it happened yesterday and the day before, and it's happened for the last 40, 50, 60 years. Now, to develop this faith from a devotional point of view requires prayer. It requires a prayer that goes along these kinds of lines. Oh, beloved Lord of the universe, please increase my faith. So anything that we lack, the easiest remedy is, from a devotional point of view, the devotee has the opportunity of appealing to the highest author and dispenser of faith. And so faith and grace are linked, so that when we access the grace, we access whatever is asked in terms of what that grace will manifest, such as faith, such as love, compassion, all of these things. Independently, we can't develop them. There has to be other components that go with it. And then the supreme dispenser of all of these things, the Lord himself, or whatever other description you have for the supreme. Did I answer your question?
I think, Swami, I was kind of like picking up some things. Because first I was thinking maybe I don't understand what faith in oneself means. Maybe that's why that question is born. And then I kept seeing
We
Swami
started with faith in
Vivekananda.
ourselves, and that leads to faith in our abilities.
Because what I was seeing with Swami Vivekananda is in that strength he had when he went out there and spoke about Vedanta, was like, it's like faith in oneself, because he had such a faith in God, and he
Yes,
knew
but
he
I
was a
have to point
soul.
out, that wasn't always there. So to establish the kind of faith that he had, now he began with faith in himself, no doubt about it. He had tremendous self-confidence. We know that from the events of his childhood and so on. He was a natural leader, no doubt. So he had faith in himself. But extending that requires a doubt. How do we establish faith? We first doubt, and then we examine. So doubt has a great role to play also in establishing the faith. It's good to be a doubting person. Without a doubt, no questions will arise. That's why we have these question and answer sessions. You have a doubt. Very good. Let's see if we can clarify it. And then let's see if you can incorporate it. Yeah.
And then another question that was coming up, then it was like, why, if we can be so rooted in faith, and then there are times that we become insecure, doubtful.
Yes.
So I had that question of why suddenly from one side you can become in the other one. Is it because you are not
because
as experiencing one side, maybe some familiar?
Yeah, because faith has a range. The range is from blind faith, which amounts to superstition, to absolute unwavering conviction. What happens in between? In between will be moments of vagaries, doubts, and so on and so forth will arise. We have to assert it until we arrive at this unwavering conviction. So establishing faith is a process, no doubt. And where will we get the conviction from? We get the conviction from, I remember Chandogya Upanishad said this, Katha Upanishad said that, Krishna said this, Jesus said that, Buddha said this, my teacher said that. And then I realized this, I got a number of aha moments. After a few weeks, you forget all that, doubt arises again. Why does it arise? It arises because the counterpoint to it is what we call the world and our interaction with it. I had faith in God. And then what happened? Well, there was somebody who practiced yoga continuously. They were doing all the exercises. They were doing all the nutritional things. And then somehow they got cancer. What kind of God gives you cancer? That doubt arises. It arises from a sense of falsehood. The falsehood is that God is some dispenser of justice sitting in heaven somewhere. A childhood memory of that comes up, and we forget all the contents of the Vedanta philosophy. So this continuous reminder, continuous rehearsal, continuous remembrance is what we call spiritual life. The practice of it, practicing the divine presence everywhere, in everything, in every activity, in every thought. Practicing that until it becomes our second nature. And then we have unwavering conviction at that point.
So truly doubt is the way.
Doubt is one of the components in the way, yes. Not perpetual doubt. You can be doubting all the time then. So, You see, doubt is a useful thing in terms of questioning. And the obvious example that comes to my mind straight away is, so in physics, in astrophysics, cosmology, people are talking of many things, and almost on a daily basis, they're being contradicted. So we used to have faith in this, and we take it for granted, but some other new discovery comes in, we doubt it. Now we doubt everything. Well, that has a constructive element to it. That if you doubt everything in that, there's an opportunity for you to apply your own examination, your own logic. So much of what we know is just parroting what other people have said without reasoning it out. And so people who are theologically adamant, doctrinal, they may say, you ask them a question, and they say, no, this authority says it. You know, the typical number 6 profile, the Bible says it, the Pope said it, and you can extend it. Stephen Hawking said it, somebody else said it. All right, okay, but what do you say? What's your examination of it? So it's an easy, lazy way out of examining the question. We always have to ask these questions: why, what, when, how, where. If you interpret that as doubt, it becomes useful. But at some point, all your questions get answered, and no more questions can arise. You see, a small child would say, why this, why this, why this? Eventually the child is given some kind of thing to eat so they can stop asking questions. Stop asking why perpetually, why not, what next? But that's a good question, you see, counter question to the why. Why not, what next? When it is a why associated with the past, you can't change the past. Why not, what next? Move on, construct your own future in this way. But the faith to be able to do that comes from your own experience and comes from the experience of others contained in what we call scripture. That is why we teach scripture, basically. I have nothing new to say. It's all in the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita, somewhere like that. See the technique Vivekananda used, very clever. In his Raja Yoga, he says, the yogis say, if you disagree, don't blame me. You take it up with the yogis. According to the yogis this, according to the yogis that. Find your own way, make your own analysis, come to your own conclusion, and the only actual proof of a spiritual existence as Atman, as Brahman, as this world, as Mithya, is your own direct experience. We say, as one of the tenets of the Vedanta philosophy, is that the final proof is direct experience. It's not based in what a person says here or there, nothing like that. So find your own way. Now, that doesn't mean to say you have a military coup against scripture, teacher, tradition. No. You use these to construct a scaffolding. But once you've constructed the building, you can take the scaffolding away. No further use for it. So create your unwavering conviction of the divinity of your own self. That displaces doubt by itself effortlessly. We have a question here also somewhere. Yes?
So this was in relation to what you said yesterday about the sacredness of speech.
Mm.
And you said that we shouldn't be using the accusatory tone and the glory of silence in some sense. But then there is a counter to this, which is that particularly in the context of Ireland, the church is accused of staying quiet when abuses were happening. Similarly, there's a lot of sayings that say that the problem is that the good people stay quiet, and then the lies get spread around more and more. So there is clearly a balance to be had between the two extremes, I suppose.
Yes. So there's a difference between accusatory speech and speech in the realm of justice. So there we have to use our discernment when to be quiet and when not to be quiet. And we have to be sure that speech is accompanied by charity, love, rather than what you call it, justified indignation or something like that, which has an atmosphere of antagonistic feeling. So there has that distinction. So the value of silence, and by the way, I'm going to put a caveat here that whatever I said yesterday, I was saying by quoting others. So my easy way out is to say, oh, so-and-so says this, so-and-so. I quoted Saint Benedict. As far as I remember, I quoted Swami Purnananda. I quoted a number of these things, you see. When Swami Purnananda was asked about his childhood background, his answer was something like this: why do you bother about these kinds of things? Why don't you think of God? And so that's the point. So yes, in the context, the specific example that you mentioned, which was in the context, let's say, of the Catholic Church remaining quiet about their crimes, if you will, of clergy and so on and so forth, and how a further crime was to cover it up and not speak about it. Having said that, there are a few who did speak up. but they seem to be in the minority because in that context, there was a hierarchical, administrative, canonical tradition that said we have to preserve this institution as much as we can. So the institution context is very different from what I was talking about yesterday. I was talking about the individual aspect, the self-cultivation point of view. So
isn't an institution just the people that represent us? Ultimately, it's not an abstract thing, it's a group of people.
Well, yes, but the group of people may be going according to certain standards and norms and policies. Yeah, of course, you can say we can decide not to follow those policies. But then you see the social pressure of that can be enormous. Without making a defense for it, you're saying that there's a concept that the institution is an extremely powerful thing, and that the institution, if I disagree with that institution, then I'm disturbing my own faith. This fallacy can be put in there. It's a fallacy, no doubt, but it's a very real context. Let's highlight this particular context. You see, and this is going to be broadcast, I suppose, so I have to be careful about weighing in a non-biased way. So this is simply my personal opinion and simply my take on this. The institution of the Roman Catholic Church really is a hierarchical institution whereby the Pope was seen to be infallible. Now, theologically, the Pope is only infallible in terms of matters of faith, not anything else. But in practice, it's not how it was taken historically. And all that became disturbed, in my personal opinion, by the Vatican Council or by Pope Paul VI on the question of contraception. And so it left people with a quandary because the Pope pronounced it in contradistinction to his advice and left people with an uncertain direction. And so what the Pope said on the one hand and what we were to practice on the other side, say, was subject to, let's ask our local priest about it, and he will say, use your own conscience. Now, for the first time, you use your own conscience against an institutional tradition. And that means that faith, we were talking about faith in the hierarchy, the institution and so on, has now been watered down somewhat. And when the Vatican Council came out, some of its pronouncements were misunderstood, misinterpreted, and given, you see, John the 23rd said, let's open the windows of the Vatican and let fresh air in. Well, it seems they left a storm in also, because what was left really was a kind of understanding or misunderstanding that there can be a liberality about everything. That further eroded the institution. Now, how to hold this institution together in the midst of all of this? And so for many years, certainly at least since the Reformation and before, there was this idea that a pronouncement has to be made and things have to be tightened. And therefore, the group moved together in a tighter configuration, and then that becomes the primary thing. Let us preserve a structure of something, because canonical law seemed to be outweighing criminal law. And so that was a kind of entrenched tradition, but times moved on. And when this was realized, well, there's a criminality about this and so on and so forth, there's this aspect to it. I think it was a genuine surprise to the Roman Catholic hierarchy. And so they were defensive about their actions based on how things were in the 1950s or the 1940s or further back, not updated into the modern times. Now, if you analyze, and I'm speaking personally only, if you analyze how did this thing arise in the first place, well, I think that there was, with the Vatican II and so on and so forth, there was a laxity in the training of seminarians. And I don't know, I'm just speculating. You can discard everything I say on the matter because it's only my personal opinion, my personal analysis on it. But the broader context is this, the more fundamental context is this, that people that go along unthinkingly with, say, institutional standards and norms without questioning them, and doctrines and dogmas without questioning them, without asking the serious questions, what, where, why, when, how, etc., then this becomes an inhibition to growth. So we have to make our own analysis, our own decision on this. And we have to decide when to speak out and when to keep quiet. And the whole purpose of the Bhagavad Gita giving us this discipline of speech is on a personal level. Like all yoga, like all tapasya, it's designed to strengthen the will and control the mind overall. And it's the mind that is our problem, and it's the mind that is our savior. So this is a part of the tapasya. This discipline of speech is part of tapasya. And it requires us, even in moments where we are critical in order to adjust injustices, still it's not to our advantage to do it in a non-charitable way. It has to be done in a loving way also. There's no place for justified anger. There's no such thing as justified anger. Anger is never justified. Now, I gave an example because a similar question came up some weeks ago. And I think I gave you Ramakrishna's example about the snake, not, hissing but not biting. The biting is the difficulty. The hissing is not a difficulty, but we have to learn how to use it in a constructive way. So we can hiss but not bite. We have to use our discernment when to do it and when not to do it. I hope that answers. Yeah.
Yes, but even at the personal level, I'm finding it very difficult to this Holy Mother's injunction not to see fault with others. I thought I understood, but I don't think I understand.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't see fault in others, then it creates its own problems, because then the society...
Yeah, but your question about seeing fault in others, and I hope others can hear your question, I think they can, is followed by rather find fault in yourself. It's not a standalone statement. Don't find fault in others. The statement goes, if you want peace of mind, don't find fault in others, rather find fault in yourself.
I find a lot of fault in myself.
Okay.
But,
now, if you find fault in yourself, you'll realize that every other individual is another version of yourself. Isn't it? Because who amongst everything is perfect? The Jesus' famous statement. Some question the historicity of it, never mind. So, he who is without sin cast the first stone. Now you see, if you find fault in yourself, by adjusting it, you can't leave it there either. So you have to adjust that. You have to remove those faults. Now, how do you do that in spiritual life? You do that by engendering its opposite. You do that by engendering the purity of truth. You engender love. On what basis? Loving your neighbor as yourself is because your neighbor is yourself. There's no two. That has to be a conviction that we have to cultivate. I'm not saying it's easy, by the way. If it's easy, there's no fun in it. So It's a question of carefully, progressively making our adjustments by firstly noticing what has to be adjusted and what has to be tuned. And once we identify that, then the process of tuning is not correcting something, but it is rather bringing in higher values. That's the technique. Otherwise, we would be looking at a narrow thing and adjusting it, and no, not quite right here. It becomes a laborious process. It's much easier to fill up with divine glory. And that is the spiritual process, filling up with divine glory, intensifying your spiritual connection on a daily basis, intensifying that. Once you do that, you'll automatically have the discernment to know what to do with others. And it's not that you won't see the defects in others, but you'll go to a deeper level. And the deeper level is the divine in others. Seeing the self in all beings and all beings in the self. This is repeated in the Isha Upanishad, Katha Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita, wherever you find scripture, you'll see it. Kingdom of heaven is within you. So all of that is there. Love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus gives the example of a Samaritan and so on. So who is your neighbor and so on. All of that is there. Now we can study that in great detail. It doesn't bring us closer to it in our own practice, but forms a basis for it. And the basis for it is the divine is present within. When we didn't see it properly, when we saw all the surface difficulties and go to the deepest possible level, when we view somebody in this way, don't you think there'll be a transformation in the person without asking? Don't you think perfection will flow through? Does it mean to say that we should not hiss? No. Does it mean to say that we should not try to make corrections where we feel they're necessary if we have the capacity to do it and if we've corrected it in ourselves? Yes, of course. But see the starting point. Don't find fault in others. If you want peace of mind, if you don't want peace of mind, then meditate on everybody's faults. And then you become a pessimist. The world is a bad place. You read criticism of it. The weather is bad. The food is bad. The relatives are bad. The religion is bad. The organization is bad. All right, how many times did you use the word bad? Well, then the world will be bad for you. So the key is a psychological key. Adjust your thinking so that you see it as God saw it. God saw the world, God made the world and saw that it was good. Can't we see it from God's point of view? But should we keep quiet in circumstances where we could say something? No. We can judge that we will say something. And I have to be honest with you, yesterday was aimed. It was an aimed talk. Okay. Yes, it was an aimed talk. Because you see, if people who are a member of an institution feel that the institution is not carrying out the values they espouse, then the people who are not practicing the values that they are expected to be practicing should rather understand that the values that should be there of love, of charity, of generosity, of fraternity, of sorority, and so on and so forth, that there's an opportunity for them to engender these characteristics. That makes a correction then. That makes a correction. Let us take, for example, an institution such as a church. Supposing you say that I will never go to that church again because so-and-so did this and so-and-so did that. then who's the beneficiary and who's the person who is losing out on this? When we come into here, for example, there's a light that is burning that indicates there's a divine presence here. Should you say, oh, let me stay away from this because so-and-so said that, or so-and-so said this to me, whatever it is? You're shooting yourself in the foot. What's the merit of doing that? So we have the capacity to use our own wisdom in a correctional way, not by finding fault with others, but rather making the correction in ourselves and then seeing the divinity in every other person, every other being, every other circumstance, event, and place. When we see that divinity everywhere, then a healing occurs. This was the key to Jesus' healing. A lame man comes, he didn't see the fault in the leg. He didn't see a defective leg. He saw the Father in heaven. And the man got up and walked. Finished. Get up and walk. But then he also said, he called the Pharisees a brood of vipers. So you can see this level of wisdom that is able to apply a certain discernment. If you have this capacity, then you should use your discernment in it. And learn when to feign anger, if you will. You take Vishwamitra. See how he battled with anger. And he was a meditator. He wondered, how does this Vashishta get this power to have a divine cow come within you? I need it. I want the cow. What was the secret? He must be a meditating man. Let me meditate also. But what was he meditating on? Power. Around Krishna's language, see, power and greed. Lust and greed. Aishwarya and Bhoga, says the Bhagavad Gita. See? So, no doubt, he became powerful, but not as powerful as Vashishta, because Vashishta was meditating on the divine. Then he finally realized it. Now, after that, did he seem to be angry? Yes, he used it. By feigning anger, he could do it. It's not that he got emotionally involved in it. He used it as a tool. Put on a stern face. Won't you do that with children? Will you laugh while you're chastising a child? You'll put on the dramatic face. You'll put up the dramatic finger, correctional finger. All of that you'll do. But do you dislike the child? Not at all. So, in adults it's different. You have to have the authority to do the same thing. You have to yourself be without blemish. Otherwise, what you're saying is, I'm better than the other person. Is it true? We don't know. How can we judge? It's an interesting question, difficult question, but there it is. All right, so I think we can leave it at that. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be on all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.